podcast, Indestructible Souls. It's been a few weeks, but I want to thank you guys for hanging in there and joining me. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast, Indestructible Souls, Mental Wellness for African American Men and Boys. If you notice that my background's a little bit different, simply because I blew a circuit in my office, so I'm actually broadcasting from or streaming from my waiting room. So yet again, time to improvise and we'll get into it. So this week, we're going to talk about parenting. Parenting specifically to African American men or African American boys. And we're going to get into that. But before we do, I got a couple of things I want to plug. Make sure that you go to my YouTube channel, Indestructible Souls, and subscribe to that. You can also check me out on Twitter. And don't forget to check me out on at Beauregard. So once again, welcome back to the show, Indestructible Souls. Let's get into it. Oftentimes, I work with a lot of parents and I work with a lot of kids. And this topic is specific to African American boys, adolescent, teenagers, and I'm going to connect it to manhood. So, one of the things I want to talk about is, are we raising our boys? Or it's a nice play on words, or are we raising our boys? So, as we know, raising our boys is that we're not only we're providing what the law says: clothing, food, shelter. But I'm talking, when I say raising our boys, I'm talking about support, guidance, and teaching them the ability to become men. Now, if you look in the dictionary, the other word for raising is, obviously it's in construction, but we're talking about raising. So in construction, to raise a building, you actually destroy a building. right? That's when a building becomes old and they need to tear it down. The term that they use is called razing. So for this topic today, are you raising your boys, meaning building them up, or are you tearing them down? And we're going to talk about that. And so I wanted to point out the difference, but I wanted to talk about parenting specifically. And a lot of times, the traditional parenting classes do not do our people justice. Why? Well, there's different parenting classes out there like Love and Logic, and then there's some other ones. And a lot of them are age specific, but where they fall short is they're not culture specific. They're not culturally relative. And so you've heard me talk on this show quite a few times about parenting, about trauma, about the neighborhoods that we grow up in, and so forth. But today, I'm going to talk specifically about the importance of parenting. And I'm not going to get into all of the different parenting styles, even though I may allude to it. But I'm going to talk about, especially for the community, do we see our kids? And I don't mean visually. Let me talk about that real quick. And let me qualify it. So when I say, do we see our kids? Oftentimes I hear parents say, well, I got 5 kids, 3 kids, and I raised them all the same. And this one didn't wild out. So why did that one wild out? Right. And oftentimes we don't understand why in the same household, why do kids quote unquote turn out differently? Right. So my question is, do we see our kids? What do I mean by that? Oftentimes we look at our kids as a version of ourselves. And then we have these expectations, and sometimes the same expectations that our parents had on us, then we impose those same expectations on our kids. And one of the things, especially in the Black community, it's almost as if we forget that we're raising little human beings, right? And then there's an expectation of performance, there's an expectation of compliance, there's an expectation of respect, and then there's an expectation that you're going to be and you're going to behave the way I want you to be and the way I say you should behave. On the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. But when I ask you, do you see your kids or do you see your child? Understand that your child is growing, your child is developing, and your child is becoming their own individual and their own person, which means they all have specific needs that do not match every parenting style, that do not match everything that we want them to, for lack of a better term. So let me break this down a little bit further. So understand this. A child's view of themselves and how they feel about themselves first comes from their family. It comes from their primary caregiver. It comes from the brothers and the sisters. It comes from the aunties and uncles, but primarily the parents. So at a very early age, when kids start to becoming of their own, how we as parents not only respond, but the lessons that we teach and the morals and the values that we teach, they begin to soak that in. Now, and here's the problem. That's good or bad, good, bad, or indifferent. So what happens is, for me as a little boy, I begin to see myself through the eyes of my parents and the people around me. Now, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. That goes back to the topic of, Are you raising your boys or are you raising your boys? Now, when I say, do you see your kids, what I'm saying is, at what point do we stop seeing the kids through our lenses and then get to know them at a different level and begin to meet their needs as they begin to develop? And I'm talking beyond the food, clothing, and the shelter. Oftentimes, when kids come to me, they be in really early on, they begin to develop opinions, they begin to see the world and begin to see the environment for themselves. And one of the biggest things that they often say is, my parents don't listen. And oftentimes my parents don't even know what I'm going through or what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling. More often than not, when kids begin to go through things, parents begin to label their kids. And they begin to get frustrated with their kids because the kids are no longer, how could I put it? The kids are no longer performing to the standard that makes the parent comfortable. I'll use that broad term. So the first question is, do you see your kids? Do you see their temperament? Do you pay attention to what they respond to and what they don't respond to? Are you checking on them about how they feel? Are you checking on them when just to get to know their interests? Are you paying attention to your child, their development, their emotional state, their mental state? Or is it, as long as you comply, and here's when I work with a lot of older men's issues trace back to their family, trace back to their parents. Now, here's the thing. When kids at a certain age begin to develop and become into their own, yes, they still need parents' guidance, but at the same time, it is our job as parents, to not make them fit our expectations, but it's up to develop and to grow with our kids. Too often, as our kids get older and begin to develop, parents don't change. What do I mean by that? What your kid needs from you at 5 is different than what they need from you at 8. What they need from you at 8 is different than what they need from you at 12. And so forth. A lot of times, parents the expectation is, it's your job to please me through compliance, and I don't have to shift for you because you're the child, I'm the parent. I don't have to listen to you because you're the child, I'm the parent. Your feelings don't matter because you're the child, I'm the parent. Now, how does this relate to African American men and boys? A lot of guys or a lot of men that I see, and I kind of got to add this caveat to make sense. When we're dealing with men who are emotionally crippled, when we're dealing with men who are emotionally illiterate and not emotionally in tune, 99% of the time that relates to some form of trauma, and it relates to parenting, it relates to childhood, and it relates to the messages that they receive about themselves early on. Here's the thing. I personally believe no one should get married or be in a long-term relationship with a person until you know their story. Why is that important? I'll get to it right now. And this all has to do with parenting. I can't tell you how many African American men that I work with that has issues with emotional literacy, expressing their emotions. They know mad, glad, sad, anger, and we'll talk about anger in a minute. But the problem is there's so much going on the inside, and oftentimes they can't articulate it, and it comes out in anger. Why does it come out in anger? Why does it come out in aggression? Why does it come out in isolation? Because there's so much going on that we never been taught how to deal with it. But even before we learn how to deal with it, we don't even know how to identify it. So the reason why I say do not get in a long-term relationship or marry until you know that person's story is because getting married and being in a long-term relationship will not maybe will bring up all of those childhood issues that have never been resolved, let alone even identified. So many times what happens is people struggle in relationships and don't understand why, because there's so much going on the inside that doesn't rear its head until manhood. But yet you have this grown man who is emotionally ill-equipped emotionally to handle all of these different emotions. Now, here's what I'm talking about. When I say, are you raising your kids, especially boys? Here's one of the things I see in this day, and I've already talked about this on the show. In terms of raising a boy, remember, parents, it's your job to move along and to develop and evolve as your kids get older, right? So obviously, we're talking about the rule of right and wrong. Are we teaching our boys the rule of right and wrong? And not only just the rule of right and wrong, but I'm talking about when we talk about a code of honor, when we're talking about respect, when we're talking about being respectful, when we're talking about the order of things. I'm dad, your son, I love you, I respect you, but there's an order of things. So are we teaching values? Are we teaching work ethics? Are we providing a safe space? And understand that safety is key. Are we providing a safe space as parents for boys to develop? Contrast to that, are we creating environments and sending messages that are hostile that tells me that I'm no good? Here's what I mean by that. If me as a father provide opportunity, for my boys to feel successful and encourage them and guide them, what message does that? It sends that I'm valued. It sends the message that I'm loved. It sends the message that I'm worthwhile. But most importantly, it creates resiliency and confidence. Now, the flip side to that is if I don't even provide the opportunity because I'm too busy and I ignore what my kids are going through as long as they don't get in any trouble and they behave and they get good grades, and then I allow them just to go off and isolate and play video games all day and be in their room, am I providing the opportunity that develops character? That's one thing. When providing consequences, am I yelling? Am I name calling? What message, follow me on this, what message am I sending to my boys that says either you're no good, you're a bad kid, you're not worthwhile, versus even though you've made mistakes, you're still worthwhile. You're not a bad person. I'm going to get to that in a minute. When you raise a building, and I really want you to catch this analogy. And what I mean by raise a building, I'm talking destroy. That's the definition of destroy. Here's what happens, and I want you to see this analogy. The engineer goes in and they strategically place these sticks of dynamite throughout the building. They strip the building of all the, the wiring, the copper, and all that other stuff. And then they plant these sticks of dynamite throughout the building. And then later on, the building implodes. Here's the analogy. Through parenting, for one, if we don't provide these things, but through negative parenting and bad parenting, we are slowly stripping away the values and the character and the tools that our men need to be strong. What happens is those little sticks of dynamite is being planted, and then when we become men, boom, we explode. Here's why. We've already talked about on the show types of trauma. Parenting. Here's what I mean by parenting. Being involved, being active, knowing your child, making it safe for emotional expression, making it safe to be different, making it safe to be an individual, making it safe to develop. Too often, I see parents that their idea of parenting or their idea is when my kid begin to mess up, it's not only the kid, but parents go harder with extreme punishments, name calling, neglect. And what I mean by neglect, it's you get to the point where you just kind of write your kid off because you're blaming your kids for the problem. Understand this, and I tell every parent that I work with, when you bring your kid to me, understand this. This is family therapy. Said 9 times out of 10, what your kid is going through is a result of you. It's a bigger family issue. I can't tell you how many parents stop coming or stop bringing their kids because they don't want to address the issues, and they don't want to address the fact that mama or daddy's always yelling, mom and daddy's always fighting. I call my kids stupid. I tell them that they're dumb, X, Y, and Z. One of the things that my grandmother used to always teach is never call a kid a bad kid. And this is even biblical. But let me put it this way. For you parents, even when your boys aren't doing the things that you would like to see them do, remember, it's about the message that we receive as boys that's going to help us to develop as people, as men. Now, why is that important? Because if you're telling me I'm bad, if you're telling me I'm crazy, if you're telling me I'm no good, if you're showing me through your actions by being neglectful parenting that I'm not worthy, then that's who I become. Remember, the little sticks of dynamite, that's going to make it explode. Now, here's the other thing. Always separate the behavior from the kid. Here's what I mean by that. If a kid is behaving badly, that's not who that kid is. It's a behavior. Too often, especially for us as African American men and boys, we behave sometimes according to expectations. So if you don't expect nothing of me, or you think I'm nothing, then I perform as nothing. So if as a kid, I don't care what the level of the level of trouble a kid is in, you always separate the behavior from the kid. And it should be more like your behavior is unacceptable. Your behavior is not pleasing. So we can work on this behavior, but you as an individual will always be worthwhile and loved. Too oftentimes, parents, when we talk about that term conditional, I show you love as long as you're complying with my wishes. Here's another thing I want to tell you real quick. Oftentimes, us as parents, we don't know how to get out of our own way and get out of our own stuff and our own mess. And then we have these kids, and then too often we project and input our traumas, our frustrations, our disappointments onto our kids when it's ours, not theirs, but we put it off on them and then they begin to carry it. I can't tell you how often when I work with kids and also work with adults, and I help them see this, meaning how mom and dad projected their trauma, their depression, their anxiety, their life disappointments, their life shortcomings onto kids, and then the kids take that on. I even see fathers who sabotage sons because of their inabilities and cannot dare to see their sons be greater than them. Understand that the framework, the foundation of boys and girls, but we're talking about boys today, African American boys, is their first introduction to their environment and to their world and to the people around them. That sets the stage of who they believe they are. And I get sometimes it may not be biological parents. I get that piece of it. But that influence of whoever that is sets the stage and tells me who I am. But at the same time, I'm going to make mistakes. Kids are going to make mistakes. That's not always a reflection of you, parents. It is your job as a parent not to punish, but to help them navigate through those mistakes to not make that same mistake again. Now, here's the difference. After the mistake, are they better off or are they worse off? Are you raising your kids to be a worse version of you? Here's the thing, and I get this and I understand this. It's difficult to give a kid what you never had. I understand that. If your parents traumatized you, or if your parents were unavailable, if your parents were super strict, overbearing, and inputted all these things, I get it. So sometimes it becomes difficult to give something that you don't have. I understand it. But at the same time, now it's time to do something different. Understand this, and I'm probably getting in trouble for this. Here's what most people don't. Well, maybe you do. The male ego from the word go is very, very fragile. Now keep in mind, in the right hands, meaning with the proper nurturing, with the proper care, with the proper balance. And what I mean by balance is don't coddle your boys. I'm not saying tear them down. I'm saying boys need balance. with the proper nurturing, that ego gains the development and gains the intelligence and the wisdom and the emotional literacy to be very powerful. One of the things you see, and I said I'll talk about anger in a second, one of the things you see is we have so many men with fragile egos that it creates this emotional illiteracy that that leads to anger, that leads to frustration, that leads to stress, and ultimately leads to some type of aggression. Whether it's a passive aggressive type of situation where we isolate and shut down, or where we lash out in aggressive behaviors, fighting and things like that. Here's the thing. Not only is aggression not manhood, the lashing out of anger is a sign of weakness. It took me a very long time to understand that. And I'll explain to you why. Most of the time when men lash out, and I mean lash out in violence and in aggressive behavior and all those things, it's a sign of it's more of a sign of weakness, because that says that there's something about me that I'm not okay with and I don't know how to deal with it. But this starts in childhood. Let me explain that further. One of the things I always teach in anger management, but also teach when I'm trying to teach men about ego. I have a client now whose ego can't take the fact that his woman makes more than him. The reason being is that's a reflection of how I feel about myself. I don't feel adequate enough. Embarrassment, shame, guilt. When these things are triggered, if not recognized and not dealt with, and if I haven't come to a place of resolve for myself, these things cause me to lash out. When we talk about aggression. So the explosion of anger is actually a sign of weakness. And it's actually the opposite of masculinity. Sure, anger serves a purpose, but when it comes from a place of vulnerability that I cannot express verbally or maturely, it's because I haven't been given tools to deal with it. This starts at parenting. I really need you to hear this. For a child, understand this. We often spend too much time on things that are superficial and not developing character, not developing a strong sense of self, not developing resiliency, not developing the emotional equipment, the emotional tools that us as Black men need in this world. Here's what I'm suggesting, is that not only do we have to change our approach, remember I said, do you see your kids? I can't tell you how many parents who don't sit down and talk to their kids. Don't even ask kids their opinions. Don't even ask kids what they think. They need experiences. They need a safe place. Here's what I mean by safety. I'm not talking just the locks on the door. I'm talking about emotional security, emotional safety to be who they are. That's what I'm talking about. That is very far from I can't talk to my dad. I can't talk to mom because they're going to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to pay attention. They don't listen. I'm saying make it okay for emotional expression at a very early age. I'm saying provide your kids with opportunity to feel success. They can't do that if they're playing video games all day, if they're asleep half the day, if you're just handing them things. And then if you get mad, you're punishing from your frustrations because those words and those things that are said hurt and they last a lifetime. Make no mistake about it. Here's the other thing. Understand this, and maybe people may not agree on me with this. It is not your kid's job to serve you. Yes, the Bible say honor thy parents and your days will be added to you. Got it. But it's parents' jobs to serve kids. Here's what I mean by that. I don't mean overindulgence. I don't mean spoil them. Until they're 18 years old, we as parents are supposed to adjust. And we're supposed to provide the physical, mental, emotional well-being, the emotional, physical, nurturing, all of those things that kids need at each stage of development. Think about that. It's our jobs to adjust, not theirs. Let me further qualify that. I can't tell you how many kids or parents and kids begin to clash as kids get older because kids now have their own opinion, their own mindset, and they are now wanting to explore the world. What happens is parents still have the same expectation, and now there's a conflict. What I'm saying is we're supposed to provide support, nurturing, discipline, and all of those things according to their development. Kids should have a safe place in parents and allowed to be who they are. And we're supposed to nurture that. Let that soak in for a second. Now, the question is, as parents, are we raising our boys or are we tearing them down? That's the question. Are we doing things that's going to help them build them up and build and develop a strong sense of self to make strong men? That's the question. And if you're doing that, then great, and I applaud you. And if not, the challenge for you is, parent, to get the help that you need to help you be a better parent and see your kids differently. Kids are not there to be used at your disposal. The things that you do as parents and as couples affect your kids. The fussing, the fighting, the neglectful parenting, those things affect your kids. Stop lying to yourself and saying that, or not even believing that the things you do don't have an effect on your kids. They do. Are you raising your boys or are you destroying them? Think about it. Once again, I'd like to thank you for joining the show. This has been Indestructible Souls, mental wellness for African American boys and men. And before I go, once again, I want to encourage you to check me out on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. You can also check me out at beauregardtherapy.com. And upcoming in April,